Michael West is a very interesting story because if anybody knows, has heard of her at all, for the most part, with the exception of a few people like Helen, who did a show in 1995, they know this picture, okay, of this absolutely gorgeous woman, okay, looks like a sort of flapper from the flapper era or whatever. And if you've actually ever read a biography of the painter Arshile Gorky, there's always either a chapter or a number of pages about her because she was his perhaps romantic partner. She claimed not, although one of the things, and I don't think it's in the case. One of the things that does exist in her papers that you can see here is a new drawing of her that Gorky did. But she said she was a Midwestern girl. She was born in Chicago and she was raised in Ohio. And she had certain stints of her life actually in upstate New York, which is close to the Midwest. And she had a very conventional upbringing. Her family was not uninterested in her having an artistic career because her uncle was a very famous cartoonist. He was a very famous cartoonist, but she sort of started out as an actress. This was taken during the time that she was acting in the Cincinnati theater. So she started out kind of as an actress. She married her leading man, who's super handsome. And if you actually, one of the endnotes in here, he talks about her, and I mean, even after their divorce, he talks about how he can't get over her, her beauty and so forth. But she came to New York and enrolled at the Art Students League. And she had, her first teacher at the Art Students League was Hans Hoffman. Hans Hoffman being a very famous, now he's considered the pedagogical master of abstract expressionism. And many other people studied with him, Lee Krasner or Helen Frankenthaler or Mercedes Matter, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of women. She only stayed in the Hoffman class for 6 months because she thought that it was too much like a cult. Okay? By the way, yeah, and at that time her name was Corinne. Her name was Corinne Michelle West. Okay, so she only stayed there, but then she went into the class, into 2 other classes, Kenneth Hayes Miller and Raphael Sawyer. So she continued, but a friend of hers who was the class monitor at the Hoffman School was by 1935 was renting a room. He was a boarder with Gorky, and kept saying, you must meet Arshile Gorky, you must meet Arshile Gorky. He was this very charismatic character. There's a little photo here from her archives. He was this very charismatic character. He was Armenian. His name was Vozdanek Adoyan. He changed his name to Arshile Gorky, naming himself after Maxim Gorky and claiming that he was Maxim Gorky's cousin. And he walked around New York in a big long coat with a big felt hat and and so on. In any case, Gorky immediately took one look at her so they did spend 2 years together. Gorky completely reconfigured her conventional art background because she had been at the Cincinnati Art Academy, and the Cincinnati Art Academy, what they did there was Frank Duveneck, who was a very famous painter in the late 19th century, who painted works that looked like Franz Hals. He was the star. That was what she learned when she was in Cincinnati. And there was, you can probably see this, there was another portrait painter there who painted her portrait in the Frank Duveneck style. So you can imagine if this is what she was being taught, starting to go around New York to museums and galleries with Arshile Gorky blew her mind. And so I talk kind of extensively about that in there. He wrote her these fervent love letters when she went to Rochester, New York, one of which is in here, and all of which are typically reproduced in the various Gorky biographies. Gorky opened her eyes, changed her, changed her outlook, introduced her to a whole new scenario. It's interesting that Gorky's work, however, doesn't really show up in her work. The very interesting part about it is that the person who kind of, I guess we'll use it again, blew her mind artistically in the 1940s was Jackson Pollock. She kept notes on art from her entire, from the 1930s until she died in 1991, and she talks extensively about the impact of Jackson Pollock on her. The only thing that we have here that's up on the wall that you can see that even kind of remotely hints at that, and I'll come back to it, but right now if you turn around, that painting that's on the wall over there, she did a number of paintings in the 40s that very much looked like Jackson Pollock and Peggy Guggenheim came to see her work. Okay, and really praised it and so on. That was at the request of Richard Pousset-Dart, who is another important artist at this, by the 40s. One of the things that I tried to show in the essay that I think is quite true, and on the one hand you might think a negative, but on the other hand was really a positive, was that she was very open to influence, and she later on said that as far as she was concerned, for creativity it takes three components for individual creativity. She said yourself, nature, and another artist. And she was able to understand in a lot of ways the importance of other artists at the same time. And of course, needless to say, as you can probably guess, they were all men. Okay, so the people that we're talking about that had a very strong impact in her life, Hoffman was one of them, despite the fact that she only studied with him for 6 months. She continues throughout the rest of her life to talk about the importance for her of Hoffman. And one of the things that Hoffman said to his students, he didn't care in the end whether what the end result of the work was going to look like, and it should have actually been abstract. But he said that you should start with something that's in front of you, landscape, still life. Whatever. Lee Krasner rejected that outright. She said that was a rigidity that she would, that. But it's very interesting because in the 1970s, West is writing, what do I start from? And she said objects, still life, landscape, blah blah blah. But if you look at the paintings, you kind of don't see that. She also was very, like Gorky. She was very interested in Cubism, and she had to get over Cubism, so did Pollock for that matter. But she was particularly interested in Picasso and Juan Gris. And the painting that you can see there, okay, is a very early work of hers. She sort of copied Gorky, and that Gorky went through these sort of psychic partnerships where for a while he was painting in the style of these artists so that he could get into their, into their brain. So that's kind of one example of something that she did. But this painting on the over here, which is in the 1950s, is after a painting by Gris called L'Ivoire. So that sometimes her inspiration came from, continued to come from other artists, and you'll see that. I mean, I can find it on here, but there are many quotes about her interest in other artists, which went so far. And if you look back there, I mean, I thought we were going to walk around, but we're not. If you look back there at that black and white work called Music the Drummer, in the mid-50s, she was painting. She was exploring for herself the kind of thing that Motherwell and especially Franz Klein was doing. She also became quite interested, and I'm flipping forward, but it's a theme, and then we'll go back. She became quite interested in European abstraction after the war. She became quite interested in European philosophy too. She was very interested in existentialism. Unbelievably, really, to a degree compared to anybody else, and you'll see one of them in here, she actually wrote essays on art in the 1940s. I can't think of another woman abstract expressionist off the top of my head that actually wrote essays on art. This is the first time that those essays have ever been published. Mercedes Matter wrote a lot of things later, but that was when she was when she was a teacher, and she became very interested in Georges Mathieu and Pierre Soulages, who were both showing at Coots Gallery beginning in the late 50s, and you can see this sort of scribble, kind of calligraphic scribble. And there are some paintings that she did. I don't know whether one of them is up here or not. There are some paintings that she did that sort of that it's almost like she's putting Mathieu on top of Soulages, because Soulages had more sort of monumental forms, and then Mathieu the calligraphy. But before that, I kind of jumped ahead. Before that, in the 40s, she did quite a few paintings, and there were a lot of black and white illustrations of pictures that don't exist anymore in those files. She did quite a few paintings that are very similar. More similar to Pollock before he began to pour and drip paint. Okay, they're similar to Pollock's sort of mid-40s paintings, right? Before he makes this kind of leap in 47. And one of the things, at the same time, she was very close, and not romantically. Oh, I actually should backtrack before I get to that. I said she was married to an actor for less than a year. She was married for 12 years, from 1948 to 1960, to a man named Francis Lee. That wasn't his real name. One of the things that you'll see that if you actually read this is I talk about the way in which so many of these artists at this time were reinventing themselves. I already said that Gorky changed his name. Pollock changed his name because his real first name was Paul, his middle name was Jackson. That was much more interesting. So he dropped Paul when he moved from California to here. Gorky became Adoyan became Gorky. She became Michael West instead of Corinne Michelle West, because Gorky told her that Corinne Michelle sounded like a debutante's daughter, and that was not going to work if she wanted to be a serious artist. Lenore Krasner became Lee Krasner. I try to put her in this kind of fellowship. I like try to replace her into this group of artists, and she was married to Francis Lee. Francis Lee is a famous combat cameraman. He did the most famous film of D-Day. He filmed the liberation of Paris. He interviewed Picasso, etc. And he remained quite friendly with a lot of the European surrealists whom he liked to entertain in New York in their apartment once they got married. His name was Francesco Sardo Fontana, but I guess it's not so good. It was not so good to be an Italian during World War. He's super famous for an interview with Miro that he did in Possibilities, the most famous sort of early articulation, I guess, of what abstract expressionism. But in any case, one of the things that he was very interested in was mysticism, and you'll find that she wrote a poem to him called "To a Great Mystic," which is in here. She had after the war, it was almost like a simultaneous interest in mysticism, which was like an age-old kind of set of beliefs, and existentialism. She was an avid reader. She read a lot of Sartre. She read a lot of poetry, and between 1942 and 1952, she herself wrote 50 poems, of which a couple are listed in here and in there. She was extremely interested in Henri Bergson. Okay, this is a woman whose intellectual qualities were as equal to her, to her. She wasn't just a pretty face, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And she was very interested in Bergson. So was Hoffman. Bergson had ideas, this concept of that everything is constantly in movement, movement in time, et cetera. I mean, I kind of, I would have to look at my notes to get the specifics of it. But she was, one of the things that Pousset Dart did was he was quite affected by the atomic blasts in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he did a number of works that incorporate that, and she began to think about how was she going to do that. She was equally affected. She was equally affected by that. Hoffman was affected by that as well. But she did something real interesting, and I don't have the pictures here, although we have one of them. I don't know if you can see this. This is a work that she did that was very much in the style of Pollock's early work. It was called Harlequin. Okay, and that was painted in 1947. A year later, she blew it up. She used like the red blood and the color of bullets and gunmetal or whatever it is. A year later, she blew it up, and interestingly enough, not this one, this one's Dagger of Light. A year after that, she painted the work that's over there. And the fascinating thing about this one to me is that this is on top of a work that was in the style of earlier Pollock. And clearly, she painted a painting a year later that was understanding what Pollock had begun to do in 47, and then she blew that one up too. There's a third one called Dagger of Light that's that's not here. She had a lot of interesting ideas. She painted works that also kind of go back to that sort of cave-looking primeval writing, etc. She did a lot of things around the same time or just after, because she had been kind of imbibing what other people were doing that somehow fell through the cracks. She was in a very important exhibition at the Stable Gallery. This actually is printed so small that you can't read the other people's names, which is too bad. And most of the people that were in that show went on to much more sort of illustrious and successful careers in the 50s. By the 50s, that's a painting of 49. By the 50s, she was already doing works like the ones that you see on the side. This was in 59. She was incorporating nails and other collage items. There's kind of some fun things in these. Hoffman's thick impasto always remained very important to her, and so, but yet in a way, I almost feel like, and I didn't really say that in here, but I almost feel like she must have been by this time looking at Rauschenberg and Johns and whatever, because there's like things in there like a watch, and she crumpled up pieces of her own poetry and incorporated them in. The one on the back is awesome. Yeah, by that one, she was already doing the same kind of thing that Mathieu was doing, which is squeezing directly, out of a tube, and then sometimes she would use either a palette knife or the back of a brush or something like that to sort of etch in there. She had a number of shows from the 50s through the 90s. They were in not famous galleries. Okay. It's interesting. It's hard to sort of figure out why things didn't pop for her a lot earlier. One of the things that I think is kind of interesting, when I said that her husband entertained all these people at their home, for the most part, she had said earlier that she didn't want to meet Gorky because there were all these, she didn't want another maestro, another genius. Hoffman, one genius in her life was enough, and she also didn't like the idea that he sort of entertained people that she thought that it wasn't, I guess, pure enough. So to speak, and she said the same thing about that she hated these various soirees that her husband gave, where he had a lot of the, surrealists and whatever. However, there were two couples that came to those soirees that she actually did like. The French poet Yvonne Goll and his wife Claire, who tried to get her shows in Paris, but she couldn't afford to send the works overseas, and then Julian Beck and Judith Malina. Okay, Julian Beck and Judith Malina were good friends. Judith Malina, in her diary, wrote some very interesting things about visiting their house. Julian Beck and Judith Malina founded the Living Theater, which was the first new dramatic sort of theater company in the United States. And I'm going to try and find this because I want to read exactly what Judith Malina said when she went and this was in the 50s. And think about some of these paintings that are and think about the fact that I told you that she was interested in existentialism. I mean, existentialism was came from Europe. After the war, it was individualistic, but also a highly individualistic philosophy, but also kind of like man against the world, Michael West wrote that life is a traumatic drama, that kind of thing. So let's see if I can figure out because I all right. So. In a diary entry written in 1954, Malina, after visiting West and Lee's, one of these evenings, she described their European-style New York apartment as covered with Michael's big, splashy, nervous canvases, all like shouts of anguish. And there, you can definitely see that in some of the works already in the 50s. You can see that on New Year's Eve of 1957, which by the way was like just 3 years before they divorced. Malina likened her friend's mood that night to a brightly enameled steel spring, sharp, coiled, painted, identifying in West an existential sense of dis-ease, noticeably also infecting her work. And I think that that one of the things that makes a lot of these works so strong is even though she may have gotten some impetus, so to speak, from this other art that she was looking at, as she later said in one of her notes, it was all about. If she started from a landscape, that doesn't mean that she wasn't bringing into the situation her feelings and how she was feeling at that time. Maybe I can find the exact quote. I paint the inner world, vibrations that I feel, and vibrations very much goes along with the Bergson idea. Emotions inside. That's not the same as corresponding to the objective world. Because the creative moment is instantaneous, if we change inside, we want the painting to do likewise. So that a lot of the ideas that she had very much fit in with what we think of as the canonical abstract expressionist approach. One of the things about abstract expressionism is that most of the painters didn't paint alike. In other words, it's not like a school like Impressionism. You can look at all the different Impressionist works, and even though they're slightly different, I mean, Renoir and Monet, and they're not so different. The abstract expressionists all painted in a very individualistic way, but they shared certain concepts, certain sort of worldviews, and also certain ideas of painting, inner. Sort of painting their inner life. The great critic Dori Ashton wrote a wonderful thing about West. She said that where is it? She said that one of the and I said that she put it very colorfully, that West was trying to figure out the best way to, quote, exteriorize her wildly fluctuating inner life. And that very much is what, in a lot of ways, what abstract expressionism was about. Identity recreation is what I tried to make the point in this essay, that this business of everybody changing their identity or whatever it is, the change of identity sort of prefigured a great burst of creativity. Okay, identity recreation and projecting interiority. These became hallmarks of the New York school, even though the painters themselves may not have been painting in styles that that sort of matched. There's a lot of things to see here. I think that what we did with the show, and Hollis will agree, is in this reintroduction of her, we really went and pulled out like the A+ stuff. There's a lot of amazing paintings here. The first time I saw some of these paintings, and my husband was with, they weren't framed, and they weren't cleaned, and and I'm kind of going to myself, oh, okay. And then, of course, now they really do. One of the people who wrote about her in an earlier, and she had some good press. I mean, Irving Sandler wrote about her in 1959, positively. This woman critic, Suzanne Burry, said that it was obvious that she was very much in the mode of the abstract expressionists that had become famous. That it was clear, but somehow or other, I don't know. She did not get her due. The great story is that the person who saved her, he's not here, is he? Because I don't know Stuart Friedman. Okay, when she died in the 1990s, when she died in the early 1990s, he bought the entire contents of her apartment for $5,000. And the entire contents of her apartment included all the paintings, all the archive papers, whatever. If somebody else had bought the contents of her apartment, all that stuff would have gone into the trash heap. So he's really the great hero, I think. But I mean, I don't even know how he knew about it. Do you know how he knew about it? Yeah.
Apparently there was some notice that was put in the paper, and apparently 3 people showed up.
Yeah.
He, Gagosian, and one other person.
Oh, really?
And Gagosian somehow
walked away,
and he was the only one who pursued it.
He was very. I mean, that's to me that's sort of a wild story. And even if somebody else had bought the paintings, I'm not so sure they would have saved all of the archival material. So in some ways, her trajectory is similar to some of these other American women abstract expressionists, and Joan Martyr, who's sitting right there in the Denver catalog. She was not in the Denver show, Michael West, but had a section about her, and actually had some of these sort of blast painting. So in some ways, her trajectory is similar. I think that she was so smart. Even though it was sort of tedious to go through 6,000 files, it sort of blew my mind to get inside her mind. She was really so. She was so smart. She was so curious. She was really interested in the ideas of her time, Sartre and Bergson and this and that and whatever. She tried out in poetry and in essays and whatever to do her own version of that, and she a little bit like Lee Krasner was so important to Pollock because she actually understood what he was doing. There's that famous story where Pollock takes her into the barn to see Lavender Mist, and he says to her, "Is this a painting?" Not, is this a good painting? But he said, is this a painting? I mean, she actually kind of understood what he was doing, and in a lot of ways, I think that Michael West understood the undercurrents of both intellectual and artistic in a way that it would have been really sad if her whole thing would have disappeared into the into the trash heap. She worked in her sister's apartment because her sister had a very large apartment. Her sister was a great collector of Pousette art. I have no idea where the Pousette arts that her sister owned ended up. It would be interesting. She owned a number of his paintings, five or six of his paintings. I think that in the end she was working in her own apartment. I do. There's no indication that she had a studio. By the way, this is a woman who sort of died in poverty. She died in great poverty. It's this. While she was married to Francis Lee, I think she had they entertained people. They had parties. They had a summer home. Etc. This is a woman who actually died, practically penniless. That's why nobody. And that's such a sort of almost like a cliche story, isn't it? I mean, it's such a cliche story. A colleague of mine at George Washington University named Mel Lader, he was a great Gorky scholar, and he had a student in the 1990s who he directed to do a master's thesis on Michael West, because of course he knew all about her. Eventually, she became my student. She became my PhD student. But so somebody the other night at the opening asked me, had I ever heard of Michael West before doing this? And I said, yes, I did, because I read this woman's master's thesis. That was her writing sample that she submitted to become my PhD student. And then in 1995, the Pollock Krasner House and Study Center had my student, and Chris McNamara, who was what was her title then?
She was the
assistant to the director. They put together a show called Michael West Painter Poet, and her poems, a lot of her poems are very much related to the help to explain. And I mean, I can't think of another woman abstract expressionist that wrote 50 poems. So I mean, so on the one hand, what I'm trying to say is that in some ways it's a story similar to a lot of these other women, but in other ways it's a completely different story, and it's a kind of a wonderful one.
I think maybe Stuart Friedman got in touch with us because of the Pollock connection.
Yeah, sure.
Because she had written, because he got all her papers, and she'd written so much about how much she liked Pollock, that was how the connection with us was made.
Right. And she wrote very intelligently about what it was about Pollock that that affected her. I mean, there's a lot of art historians who basically said the Namath pictures of Pollock painting led to all kinds of stuff. But people like Irving Sandler or whatever, kind of said, well, there were all these followers of de Kooning, but there were no followers of Pollock, except for maybe like she was a follower, but she wasn't a follower. You understand what I'm saying? She actually understood what there was in these artists that she could leap off from. I guess that would be that would be the way. And she's very not known amongst others. There is this wonderful photograph in here that Pousette Dart took of her. He did this whole series of sort of multi action photo. I mean, she was kind of, she was in the group, but I don't know whether it was, she kind of didn't know how to promote herself, she those things that Judith Molina said about her, I mean, anguish and what, I think she may have had some, some things in her mind that precluded the kind of success that other people had that had been in that same stable gallery show, etc. But I think it's thrilling that she is being rediscovered, re-entered into the, into the situation of, and she is not a second generation abstract expressionist. No way. I mean, I'll just say one more thing. I start the essay with a comparison of these two photographs. I find it a very fascinating comparison of Lee Krasner standing in the barn with Jackson Pollock's paintings, and of this taken by Francis Lee, her husband, who of this sort of film noir kind of thing, where Lee is kind of dressed in sort of country clothes, and she's dressed in this chic city outfit and whatever. But if you look at this painting that's on that's on her easel here, the eyes, the dripping, the whatever. I mean, there's all there's a whole. She indicates her understanding of what Pollock was doing and so forth. And I keep coming back to the picture. You'll see. I start with it, and then I keep coming back to it. As a way to figure this out. So I hope that you will take a catalog home. You will read it, and you kind of soon become Michael West aficionados as well. Oh, wait, apparently there's one more question, but then you can clap. Yeah.
This is a very exciting show.
Yeah.
And I'm thrilled that Ellen was able to do research and look at those 6,000 items.
Yeah. This is Joan Martyr. Yeah.
My students have been working with me over the years, I'd say from the 1980s, but we have to say that one of the reasons that we have an artist that was almost lost to us is because of all of the women who were put in a lesser category, non-existent category, vis-a-vis abstract expressionism. And all you have to do is to look at the exhibitions, the group exhibitions of the abstract expressionists over the years to find out that even in recent decades, if any artist gets into the show that's a woman, it's Lee Krasner and no one else.
Yeah.
And it's only been recently, and I remember when I was working with my students on a show of women, all women abstract expressionists, I didn't know what to call the show. I thought I'm going to get attacked.
Well, thank God it wasn't Sparkling Amazons.
It wasn't. So I ended up calling Women and Abstract Expressionists.
Yeah.
It's a show actually that went to Guildhall in the 1990s.
Yeah.
And I was attacked in the press for associating women with abstract expression.
You were, yeah, she was, yeah.
Cultural commissar. By Hilton Kramer. Okay. But what I was going to say is that there are other women. I mean, I'm so excited for her because my students wrote about her also. But it was so difficult to see the work, to find out material on her. And there are other women out there.
Yeah.
We, at one point, when we were putting together Women of Abstract,
The Denver show.
We had 20 women, and then we had to cut it down to 12.
Yeah.
So, and that was unfortunate because there were some really, really good people, like Michael West,
Yeah.
who should have been in the show.
Well, it's interesting. Sometimes my students would ask me things like, could there possibly be some great artist toiling away in a basement that nobody knows about? No, okay? And I kind of said that to a large degree, it's not possible. To a large degree, it's not possible because you need the apparatus of critics, curators, and art historians to expose. And so if somebody's working away in a basement and nobody knows who they are, then I don't, whatever. This is sort of a antidote, or proves me wrong or whatever. And there probably are other examples. Okay, there probably are other. There are some other examples on the West Coast too, like in San Francisco. There's a whole bunch of really good artists who have gotten known. And by the way, if you go look at that painting probably weighs a ton. Okay, that painting weighs a ton. So she was doing this the same time or before or what, as Jay DeFeo, okay? And Jay DeFeo has like one great painting, okay? And the rest of them are like, eh, whatever. And I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Great painting is in the Whitney.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it has. The rose. I mean, there's like one really important painting that weighs like 47,000 tons. Whatever. But I mean, she was mixing things in there just like Pollock. Like sand and debris and and so on. And so I guess she needs somebody to.
Oh, by the way, she
Yeah.
and Lee
Yeah.
are both in the show at the art students.
I know.
Alumni of
Yeah.
of
Of the art students.
Not just
Yeah.
expressionists, but
Mhm.
they are both
Women's, post-war women.
Yeah. I mean, this is the moment, okay? Perhaps. Well, the Denver show certainly played a role in this. Mary Gabriel's book, which I think is somewhat overblown, has played a role, whatever. And the fact that Mary Gabriel's book is going to be turned into a TV series by the same person that did the, Mrs. Maisel is whatever. But I think that it's obviously I would consider very long overdue. I will end this only with saying that something that I found out. I wrote my dissertation on Lee Krasner, okay, and much later I found out that from somebody else that all of my friends in graduate school thought that I had cut my throat professionally by writing about a woman artist. Writing about a woman artist. That was the scuttlebutt that I had cut. Well, yeah, what year was that? Well, I got my degree in '81, although I had done a number of things in between each of my degrees. Okay. By the way, this is my family. That's my sister who just said that. Yeah, and my brother behind her. And my various, my sisters-in-law and my cousin and my niece and everybody else. Yes, yeah.
About women artists being so out of favor, I've always heard that, especially with Michael West,
Yeah.
but also with George Hartigan,
Yeah.
Lee
Yeah.
I heard that it was really because only men sold paintings and they didn't want.
Right. Well, I'm sure that that has something. Now, the interesting thing about Michael West is, of course, since she was kind of with Gorky at the time or whatever it is, she first changed her name to Mikael, Mikhail, which is sort of like a Russian spelling. Yeah. She went through a very short period of time when she actually exhibited as Mikhail or whatever it is, but by 45, and she changed her name totally. In other words, some people had, Grace Hartigan didn't change her name. She only used that. She used George, professionally for a while, but she didn't change her name. Corinne became Michael, and that was it. Corinne became Michael, and that was it. So walk around. I can stay for a little while and answer any questions if you have. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
There was a fact that she started in the Cincinnati Music Academy because she's a poet, she's a painter, and she began with music.
I don't remember does it say that there? Yeah. I think she did. I think very briefly she did that, and she started out to be an actress. There actually are wonderful. It was too much to do, but there are some wonderful pictures of her from the newspaper in Cincinnati. Dressed as this person that she played. I will end. I will read what her first husband wrote about her. I read it and I was like, first of all, he looked like a matinee idol, but then again, she looked, she. But I will read you what her first husband wrote about her after they were divorced in 1934. Randolph Nelson was his name. Apparently, she must have said something, corresponded with him or something, and asked her like, what's your current? They were divorced in 31. They were married in 31, divorced in 31, and they must have been still corresponding in some way. And she must have said, well, who are you with now? What's your, who's your current? So he writes back to her. My current emotional interest is not current any longer. For I met her 4 years ago in a Midwestern town of no mean proportion, sometime in the spring of 1930, I believe. She is, as you know, the most beautiful girl I have ever known, and my interest has never flagged. I've seen her since several times. In fact, I think I married her once, but that was long ago, and in my recollection, she is the stardust of my song. And then if you read the Gorky letters, they're like, I mean, they're you know. So she was a woman, at least, you know, she occasioned an enormous amount of, and you know, sometimes it's actually not a positive thing to be so beautiful. sometimes being really beautiful, you know, can be, and she still, I mean, she remained beautiful, you know, she remained beautiful all her life. But she did say life is a traumatic drama, so you don't know where where things are going. Anyway, now if you look around and if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer individual questions. And thank you all so much for coming out on a Saturday afternoon.